Hello, and welcome to a new chapter of Azure Support Academy. In this chapter number 20, we are going to compare the performance of two different databases. My name is José Manuel Jurado. I am a escalation engineer in Azure SQL Database, subject master expert in this technology, and a speaker in different events. This last week, we got several cases that our customer reported that the same query running in one specific database took more time than in another database. In this session, we are going to review what was the steps that we did in order to find what is the reason. But how many steps, or what was the steps that we did in order to check the different things that could impact in the performance cases? The first one was to review to have the same number of rows. You know that most rarely the customer is comparing different number of rows in different tables, and they could have some impact about it. The second one was to review how many statistics that we have, if we have the same numbers, if we have the same updates, dates, etc. The third one was to review if the customer revealed the indexes. It's very important to avoid the fragmentations, to have the same data, etc. The fourth one, was to check the compatibility level. You know that depending on if you are working with SQL Server 2016, 17, the version 150, 140, etc., the performance could be impacted depending on the compatibility level that we have. Also, other things that we found was to review if the customer is doing other checks, other runs when they run the query, because we are not going to have the same performance. For example, we found that the customer have a lot of CPU usage. Meanwhile, they run the process, but in another database, they don't have any workload, and the CPU was totally zero. Other things that we found is to review the configuration. So we are going to show you several topics that we need to check when we are testing the performance. For example, max DOP, the optimizer of hotfix optimizer. I'm going to show you after. And finally, other things that we found that was very interesting is about that the table needs to have the same structure of the table. We are going to show you several details that we found in this those troubleshooting process. Okay, let's get started. Right now, the first check that we are going to do is to know if we are using the same, if our customer has the same number of rows in the table that the customer are using this query. This is the query that I'm going to do. Just only that I would like to know per table. I would like to know how many rows, what is the space. And one thing that I would like to, for you, one suggestion is please pay attention about that we have the same number of rows of the table. Okay, we have two databases here. As you can see, they have the same performance tier as standard 12, and I'm going to run the query to know how many rows that we have. I'm going to click here in new query and run the query. We saw that the query that the customer is using is the table is Alex. As you can see here, we have this number of rows, and I'm going to do the same running in another database. So this table, as you can see, we have this number, and I'm going to compare with another one. So as you can see, we have some difference. So one thing that we need to pay attention is about the number of rows, because if we run, for example, any query, for example, this one, we enable the execution plan. As you can see, they are going to they are going to read around this number of rows to millions. No, it's 28 millions of rows and 500,000. But if we run the same, running another database, as you could see in the execution plan, they are going to read a few number of rows. Okay, less number of rows, sorry. Other very important topic that we need to check is how many statistics that we have for the table, when they were updated, and how they were updated. Using this query, you are going to see the numbers, when, how was updated. My two takeaways that I have is first is pay attention about the column that we have last updated column when we run in the results of this query, how many rows, row sample and filter rows. And if you see any difference, my suggestion is to run updated statistics with full scan. Why? Because as you know, SQL, if SQL detects that the query needs to update the statistics or needs to create a new statistics, SQL will create a statistic just only using the, let's say, a sample of the 10% of the rows that you have. If you and sometimes this is not a total representation and in terms of cardinality about the distribution of the data. For the reason, my suggestion is when you detect this, is try to suggest to the customer to run or to update the statistic using the full scan. Okay, I'm going back to the two databases that we have right now, and I'm going to run the query to know how many statistics that we have. I'm going to run the new query. I'm going to copy and paste the query that I have. Here. We have right now 3 statistics, as you could see. This statistics is based on the indexes. As you could see, this is a primary key, another index. And another one is another statistic that was created by the user, as you could see here in number 1. So I'm going to do the same query with another database. And you could see here we have just only 2 statistics. Okay, so it's very important that it seems that we miss one. Okay, and I'm going to explain why. So suppose that I'm going to run this query. Select start top, for example, 2000. Start from Alex, where age it's, for example, 9. I'm going to activate the execution plan and I'm going to run this query. As you could see here in the execution plan, we run the index scan because we don't have any index for the field age. We review this number of rows and the execution took less than 1 second. I'm going to run the same query to another database. Remember that in this database we have just only 2 statistics. Okay, I'm going to run the same query to the database standard 12 other. The execution plan that we are going to see of the time it's take is more or less is the same, but the cause is something different. We have the feeling that the process took more time that if we compare with the standard 2. What was the previous one? What was the reason? The reason is when I run this query, as you can see, we have a new statistic here that we have previous one. So it was auto-created by SQL, as you could see here, and if you could see here, the row sample is around 300,000 rows. That means that SQL ran the created statistics, but without using all the rows, just only having a performance and the 10% of the more or less 10% or less than one. So in this case, if I run again the query, much probably if, for example, if I choose, for example, run in another query, for example, 19, if I run the query, most probably this query will take more time. What is the reason that took more time? Because right now it took 1 second. It's because the statistic use just only this number of sample. So right now I'm going to run the update with full scan in order to have all the data in this row sample field. Okay, as you can see, I execute this query, update statistics with full scan. I'm going to run again the query. As you can see here, the time spent was 0. If I go back to the query that I have my statistics, you could see here that the row sample is this number. So in the end, this is that the best scenario that we could have is to have in the row sample the same number of rows that we have in this column, in column rows, because we have all the catenarity, all the distribution of the data that we have right now. Other important aspect is are the indexes. Okay, so for example, the number, if we have misindexes when we run the query, or the fragmentation, etc. In this topic, we are going to check how many indexes that we have for the table and what is the fragmentation in the indexes that we have. Okay, so what is the takeaways from this session? Is we have the same number, same column, same definition of the indexes. If we have a huge fragmentation, try to review the article that we have in our tech community that you know, in order to suggest to the customer to run this script, and also review the last update for the index. Let me show you an example. As we mentioned, please remember that we have a blog that we use to add many articles based on experience you have in this URL. You could see experience that we have using private link, using the different, for example, issues that we have, enable or not the actual firewall and BCP, how to improve the linked server, etc. So let's go to SQL, and this is the first table. As you could see, we have two databases, and I'm going to run this query, as you can see here, and I'm going to run this query that we mentioned. So in this case, we have two indexes. Okay, one is clustered and non-clustered. I'm going to do the same for another database. As you could see, we have, let's say, the same index, and also here we have the same column for these indexes. Let's try to review. We have the same column. Yes, we have the same column, etc. Also, it's very important to know the fragmentation. I'm going to run this query in order to obtain the fragmentation of the indexes. Right now, for this index, we have a fragmentation that the first one is 8%, another one is 22%. I'm going to do the same in another database for this table. And as you can see, we have a huge fragmentation here for the primary key. So in this case, one suggestion that we could do is try to suggest to the customer to try to rebuild indexes or follow up the instructions that we gave in in our script that we have in our blog. So other point that is very useful is when the index has been revealed, for example. In this case, using this query, you could see here, okay, here, you could see here when was the last time that this index has been revealed. Other important aspect, it's about to use to review this to have the same compatibility level. So one thing that we could suggest to the customer is to run select star from sys.databases in order, for example, to review the compatibility level. I'm not going to show you a demo because it's just only run this query, but as you can see, the most important thing here is to is to know what is the compatibility level. If you have some differences about it, please try to suggest to the customer to have the same, because depending on the compatibility level, that means that you are running, the engine is running in SQL Server 2016, 14, 12, etc. You could have some difference in terms of execution plans. Other very important is another takeaway that I would like to suggest is to review other important things about if the customer has the same isolation level, is encrypted or not, they have enabled the accelerate database recovery or not. But if you run always this query, you are going to have all this information in the results of this query. Other very important aspect is to review if both databases are running with the same environment. More than the environment, I think that we could say that with the same resources available. If we run this view, sysdm underscore db underscore resources you are going to see, for example, the capacity right now, or what is the resource consumption that we have. In this case, for example, during this test, we found that the customer is running some activities that is causing that they reach the maximum capacity of the log. In this case, we need to try, if could be possible, it's clear, that have the same resource consumption in both databases. Other very important aspect is, for example, that could impact on one query is to identify if we have blocking issues. Okay, so for the reason, again, in our blog, we suggest, or we wrote down several articles about how to identify blocking issues, how to identify running queries. Also, we mentioned about what is the performance using external tables, and also the final one is to detect if we have another open transactions. Other important thing that we need to check with our customer it's if we have the same database configuration. For example, running this DMV database scope configurations, you could see the configuration of your database in SQL database. For example, if we have the same maxstop, if we have the same query optimized hotfixes, or for example, if we have optimized ad hoc workload. So it's very important at least to have the same value in the maxstop, to say the same value for the legacy kernel estimation, okay? And other important thing, if could be possible, it's clear, because if we are running in a production environment that is not possible, is to clear the procedure cache. Okay, so we could suggest to the customer to run alter database scope configuration clear process cache, if could be possible. If not, because will impact in all the queries, because we are going to clean all the execution plans that we have for multiple things, for multiple other queries. If not possible, don't suggest this, but if possible, it will be great in order to start with the same one. If that is not possible and you need to do it, one thing that we could suggest is to use, for example, at the end of the query, the option with recompile, or the option, for example, with maxdop, etc. We have some hints that it's possible to, without changing the configuration of the database, to run this query. For example, let me show you an example. Okay, suppose that there is not possible to to modify the max dop, the default value that we have for database, or it's not possible to clean the project cache. The idea is that we could do, for example, is to use several hints. For example, suppose that we're choosing this one, where age equal, let's say 12, okay, and we could use, for example, right now option, for example, max top 2. In this case, we are going to instruct to the SQL to use, if it's needed, to use 2 CPUs for this query. Okay, or for example, if we want to recompile a query. So if I remember well, it's this one. Yeah. Okay, so we have several techniques in order to skip if something happened or if it is not possible to modify the configuration of the entire database. we are reaching at the end of this session, but the last point that I would like to review with you, an important and a very important topic, that it's about to have the same structure for your table. Okay, it's very important because it's not the same, or you could have some important issues in terms of resource consumption and in this case time in order to execute this query. Let me show you an example about it. Okay, so let's try to review what is the database, the structure of the table. Okay, so we have, again, we have two tables. We have one option that we have in order to review all this the structure of the table is to expand here and expand the columns that we have, constraints, trigger, indexes, and compare one by one. Or other option that we have is to run, for example, sp help Alex, the name of the table, the name of the object, etc. If we run this query, as you could see here, we have all the information. What is the collation? What is the data type? If we have the index, constraints, etc. I'm going to do the same in another table. As you could see, it's more or less is the same. Okay, and I'm going to, for example, I choose another table. For example, is this one that contain the same structures, but it's not equal. So I'm going to run the same query. The table has the same rows, okay, but I'm going to show you how is the impact when we have, for example, a different structure. For this example, the number of rows is the same, the structure is the same, constraints is the same, index is the same, etc. But right now, I'm going to filter by using the name field, and as you can see, we have varchar, okay, and in this case, I'm going to use varchar, okay. So I'm going to remove everything here. Okay, I'm going to choose the first table or the first database. Remember that this table contains this varchar, okay? So I'm going to click here. I'm going to run select, let's say top 20, start from table Alex. We have this value. I'm going to use this value, okay? It's right now, it's here. I'm going to click where name equal this one. I'm going to run this query. I'm going to enable also the execution plan. As you can see here, the execution is taking not too much time, and in the execution plan at the end is in the seek. Okay. So what happened, for example, if I run the same query to the same table? Sorry, the different table. It's Alex not equal. Okay. Enable the execution plan. Not equal, it's the same. Not equal, yeah. Okay, I'm going to run the query. Okay, as you can see, the execution is the same, right? So just only one row, it's fine, it's ready. But let me try to do the following. Because this situation, it's very common that we found every day in our environment. So I'm going to create a parameter. This parameter will contain, for example, this value. As you can see here, the execution is not the same because right now they are using an index scan. Okay, right now it's not taking too much time, but right now, as you can see here, the execution plan is totally different. What is the reason about it? The reason is because in some application we found that our customer defined that the table, the field that they are they are searching the data is varchar, but some parameter are using varchar. So we have a conversion implicit in this table. So as you could see here in this message, we have a conversion implicit to varchar, okay? And also instead to have an index seek, we are using an index scan. So in this case, the best idea is to remove this one or change to varchar is needed, or change the parameter value that running this. We are going to have a better performance without using parallelism and also using index seek. Okay, it's very important right now. As you could see, that the execution time was not we don't have a huge difference about it, but the most, because right now we are working with around 22 cores, but the thing that we have here is right now we need to use, for example, for this simple query was needed to use at least 1 or 2 cores that run in parallel in order to obtain the data. Okay, for the reason, always it's very important to suggest to our customers about to use the same parameter in these values for the data. If you don't need to use parameter, for example, you could reproduce this issue. It's very simple. It's just only to use, for example, and the letter n in this value, and you are going to have the same, okay, the same issue. I'm not going to say if I use this one, for example, or if I try to run this number of rows, that in this case also the execution at the end is reading all the rows that we have.